Gotcha. Thank you. All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Agatavach, Gesundte Winter. Hopefully, everybody had a beautiful and uplifting Yom Tov. And we have the great schos today, Baruch Hashem, to begin a brand new parak in Maseches Ksuvos. Really, a couple of really exciting blot ahead of us in this last week. We're heading into our last week of Ksuvos. Meretz Hashem, a week from tomorrow, I believe a week from tomorrow, is the completion of the Masechta. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Dr. Linda Weinberg, Sarah and Ricky Gratz, Julia, Rena, and Eve, in loving memory of their husband, father, and Zayda, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Peretz, Moshe ben Avram, David, Ayala and Sarah Steinberg, and the Schosar of Shleimer for Shulam Susha, Adam and Yudi Ben Zev, and the Schos of all of our tefillos being Niskabel, and my mishpach and myself in the dedicating the shir today, the Daf Yomi shir today, in the Schos of Aliyah for the neshama of our grandfather, whose yard site is today, Menachem Mendel ben Levi David HaKohen. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an Aliyah, all of the families in Nechama, all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. With that, let us begin. Today's daf is Kuf Hey 105. We are picking up on the bottom of Kuf Dalet Amud Beis 104b at the Mishnah. Fascinating sugya ahead of us today. Shnei Dayani Gzeros Hayu B'Yerushalayim. There were two judges who used to judge Gzeros. I'm going to say Gzeros literally means decrees. They would go ahead and they would adjudicate decrees in Yerushalayim. We'll see exactly what that means. Who were these judges? Admon v'Chanan ben Avishalom. One of them was named Admon, and the second was known as Chanan ben Avishalom. Why is this being mentioned over here? Chanan omer shnei dvarim. Chanan said two things. Admon omer shiva. Admon said 7 things. Now, we'll say they probably said many more than 2 things and 7 things respectively. The idea being that these are the rulings that our Mishnah is going to discuss. So the Gemara says, what are amongst the things they said? So Misha halach lemedinas hayam. So we'll say this is why this is Maseches Ksuvos. Let's say a man went overseas. Now, by the way, I'll just point out over here that Rashi says, Chanan omer shnei dvarim shelo hayu chachamim modim lo. That Chanan said 2 things that the chachamim did not agree with. So he said many things, but 2 things that the chacham didn't agree with. So what's one of the cases? Here we go. Misha halach lemedinas hayam. Someone went overseas. Man went overseas. V'ishto tova'as mizonos. His wife comes to court because she needs mizonos. Right? In other words, he left, and he forgot to leave her mizonos. It happens. He was in a rush, right? He's got somewhere to be, flight to catch. So she comes to Beis Din. She says, I have no form of support. So what's the halacha? Chanan omer top of kuf hey tishava b'sof lo tishav b'tchila. So Chanan says she does not. So let's see. She doesn't have to take a shavua. She doesn't need to take an oath before collecting mizonos. Remember again, what would be the point of the oath? The point of the oath would be out of concern that maybe he did leave her something. She's claiming she has no mizonos. He's not here to potentially counterclaim. So you might have thought that she should be required to take a shvuah before Beis Din liquidates any part of the estate for her mizonos. Kamash Malan, Chanan says that halacha l'maaseh, the only time a woman ever has to take a shvuah is when collecting her ksuva. If she wants to collect her ksuva and her husband is not there, which is very often the case because he died. In other words, that's when you collect the ksuva, or upon divorce. But l'maaseh, again, only when she's going to collect the ksuva after the death of her husband does she have to take a shvuah. But halacha l'maaseh for mizonos, she does not have to take a shvuah. Nechlu kalav b'nei kohanim gidolim. The sons of the Kohanim Gedolim disagreed with this statement. Va'amru tishava b'tchila u'basov. And they paskined that no, in this type of situation where the husband is not present, a woman has to take a shvuah before collecting mizonos, and she also has to take a shvuah ultimately when she comes to collect her ksuva. Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus kedivrehim. Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus paskined like the Chachamim, namely that she has to take a shvuah even for mizonos. Amr Yochanan ben Zakkai, Yafa Amr Chanan, Lo Tishava Alabasov. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai disagreed. He held like Chanan, namely that halacha l'maisa, a shvuah is only required for ksuva collection. A ksuva is not required for mizonos collection. Okay, Shabbosai, this is our first fundamental machlokes. Also, I'll just point out something amazing. Sometimes we look at the Gemara, right, and we see all of these different names of Tanaim and Amoraim, and we think, wow, it's like a vast sea of people. What's fascinating about a Mishnah like this is that there were thousands upon thousands of other, probably tens of thousands of other Talmidei Chachamim who were great, but weren't Tanaim and Amoraim. Again, it's just to point out like the greatness of Klal Yisrael. See, here you have these Dayanim. Who's ever heard of these people? Now we've heard of them because they're a Mishnah in Ksubis. But Lamaisa, they're being called not a Tana, not an Amora, but great people nevertheless. It's an important yesod. Even if people don't know your name, I should say, popularity or publicity is not the metric of success. Right? The metric of success is knowing that you're making a difference in life day in and day out. People may know your name, people may not know your name. That's not the litmus test. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Ramini, the Gemara raises the kasha. Nothing to do with the psak of the Mishnah. So I'll say, the machlokis over here is a fundamental machlokis. Husband is overseas, woman needs mizonos. She comes to Beis Din to collect mizonos. Does she need a shavua or not? So Chanan paskind, no. Bnei Kohanim Gidolim, yes. Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus, like Bnei Chacham Gidolim, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, like Chanan. Okay, so that's our machlokas. Fine. Or meaning, Maria Zakasha, Shlosh Dayanim Gzeil Sei B'Shalayim. So let's listen to this. Gemara quotes the Brisa. The Brisa says there were 3 Dayanim who paskin regarding Gzelos, matters of theft in Yerushalayim. Who were the 3 Dayanim? Admon ben Gidai, Chanan HaMitzri, V'Chanan ben Avishalom. So we'll say there are 2 questions now. Number 1, Kasha Tlasa Train. We'll say here's problem number 1. Our Mishnah said there were 2 Dayanim in Yerushalayim. This Brisa says that what? There were 3 Dayanim in Yerushalayim. Question number 2, Kasha Gzeros Agzelos. In our Mishnah, it says that the 2 judges judged Dine Gizeros. Remember again, what does Gzera mean? What does Gzera mean? A decree. The Brisa here says, what do they adjudicate? Gzelos, theft. So the Gemara says, so how do you reconcile this? To which the Gemara says, K'bishlam atlas atrein lo kasha. Supposed to say the fact that our Mishnah recorded 2 Dayanim, the Brisa recorded 3, that's not a question. Why? So the Gemara says, the chashiv la katani, the lo chashiv la lo katani. Because supposed to say again, Rabbi, who we just learned about in yesterday's daf, right? Rabbi, he included the Dayanim who he thought were chashiv. He didn't include the 3rd Dayan who he felt was not chashuv. The Brisa, and both say, that's not a slight. It's just our Mishnah included only the ones who had a certain level of prominence. The Brisa is a bit more expansive in its list. So therefore, again, the 2 verses 3 is not a kasha. What about El Gzeros Agzelos kasha? We'll say, what do you do about the fact that our Mishnah used lashon of gzeros? The Brisa used lashon of gzelos, to which the Gemara said, Nachman bar Yitzchak, shayu gozin gzeros al gzelos. It's not a contradiction, we'll say. It's the same thing. What did they make decrees about? They made decrees about gzelos. In other words, this particular Beis Din in question, the Beis Din of Admon, Chanan ben Avishalom, and according to the Brisa, there was a 3rd person, Chanan HaMitzri, right? What did this Beis Din specialize in? Gzeros. What type of gzeros? Gzelos. I will say, we're going to see, by the way, that gezel in this context doesn't just simply mean like Ruvain steals from Shimon. It also means damages. For example, the Gemara says, Kidisayis in the Brisa, Kimtonetia. But say it's an interesting case. Let's say my animal walks into someone's field, right? My animal walks into Ruvain's field, and my animal goes ahead and eats a sapling. So how do you assess damages for a sapling? Because unlike a regular tree, right, which is a mature tree, you could go ahead and figure out, what's the yield of the tree. But a sapling hasn't yet done anything. So how do you assess the damages of a sapling? So the Rabbi Yossi Omer, Gozrei Gzeros Yerushalayim Omrim. So I'll say, here it is. Rabbi Yossi quotes the Gozrei Gzeros B'Yerushalayim. So Rabbi Yossi himself is quoting these Rabbanim, right? Remember again, like the Brisa told us, it was Chanan ben Avishalom, Admon ben Gidai, and Chanan HaMitzri. Now granted, only Admon and Chanan Ben Avishalom were quoted, right? The other Hanan HaMitzri was not quoted in the Mishnah. Okay, but nevertheless, he says the Gozei Gzeros in Yerushalayim they paskind Netia Bash Nasa Shtei Kasef. If the animal eats a sapling that's 1 year old, it's 2 kasef. Bas Shtei Shanim Arba Kasef. 2 years, it's 4 kasef. Good. Sefer Rabbi say, here's what we've done. It's, by the way, 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in, it's already been a very, very fulfilling day. Watch this. Remember again, we started out the Mishnah, we quoted 2 questions. Question number 1 is our Mishnah quotes 2 dayanim, right? The Brisa quoted 3 dayanim. Not a problem. The Mishnah quoted the 2 most prominent of the 3. Fine. Our Mishnah said gzeros. The Brisa said gzelos. Also not a problem. How do you reconcile it? There are gozrei gzeros dealing with gzelos. This was a Beis Din, which again specialized in damages and theft. Okay, beautiful. Or minhi meriz kasha shlosha dayani gzeros hayu b'Yerushalayim. Both say there are 3 dayani gzeros, right? 3 dayanim. In Yerushalayim, we specialized in gezeros, and now we understand gezeros means gezelos. Who were they? Admon, V'chanan, V'nachum. Okay, so we'll say, so now we have another problem. What's the other problem? See, the Brisa also quoted 3, but the Brisa's 3 was Admon, Chanan, and Chanan. There's Chanan HaMitzri and Chanan ben Avishalom. Now this Brisa is quoting Admon, Chanan, and Nachum. Nachum. So we'll say, now we have a new dayan. Amra Papa, Man Tana Nachum, Rabbi Nassim. No. Who quotes? Who's quoting over here? Nachum, that's Rabbi Nassim. The Sanya, Rabbi Nassim Omer Af Nachum Hamadi Migozre Hagzero Shibirushalayim. Even Nachum Hamadi, he was amongst those who were one of the Dayanim, who was Gozre Gzeros in Yerushalayim. V'lo hodu lo Chachamim. But the Chachamim ultimately again did not agree with him. Okay, so therefore, there's sometimes a machlokes, a historical machlokes. Ultimately, again, what was Nachum one of the Gozei Gzeros? Was he not one of the Gozei Gzeros? So we'll say again. I want to point out this is a historical machlokes. Good. The Sulaka. So we'll say here's what's interesting. When you read the Mishnah, you read the Brisa, right? The 2 Brises now. It makes it sound like how many dayanim were there in Yerushalayim? Right, 3, right? Maybe 4. Right? Because again, everybody's agreeing on Admon, Chanan ben Avishalom, Chanan HaMitzri, and then there seems to be a historical machlokas about this man, Nachum Hamadi. So the Gemara says, is that it? That's all the words you will say. Listen to this beautiful brisa. V'am Rabbi Pinchas, Am Rabbi Oshia. Get ready for this. Shlosh mi'os v'tishim v'arba batei din in Yerushalayim. There are 394 batei din in Yerushalayim. 394. Kinegdon, Bate Kinesios. There are 3, corresponding to them, another 394 shuls in Yerushalayim. Ukinegdon, Bate Midrashos. And I will say, corresponding to them, 394 Bate Medrash in Yerushalayim. So Reb Jerry's here with us online over here. Baruch, I'm looking at the Chorva Shul in the back. I think I see the Chorva, right? One of the Batei Knesset. Also, by the way, I'll point out, you want to talk about like the resurgence of Eretz Yisrael. These numbers are not so far off. There's probably more than this. In contemporary Yerushalayim. I'll say it just gives you a feel. I'll just point something else interesting. Rashi says Batei Knesios are lehispalel to daven, Batei Midrashos Lemishnah Ula Talmud. So also remember again, in Gemara, there's a Beis HaKnesses that's used for davening and a Beis HaMedrash that's used for learning. I will just point out one of the unique privileges that we have in our shul, in shuls today, is that these two functions have been combined into one space, endowing the space with a heightened level of sanctity. So the fact that here, we'll say in this very base medrash, base knesses, tefillah happens here, learning happens here, endows the space with such overwhelming kedusha. So the point of most of the Gemara is okinegdan bate sofrim. So let's listen to this, and 394 yeshivas, 394 schools. Rashi says lilmo tinokos, right? Schools for young children. So we'll say the point over here is what? There were a lot of dayanim, right? 394 batei din. And we'll say, by the way, I'm sorry, I didn't even tell you the kunz of it. Rashi says batei din shel esrim v'shlosha. the type of batei din of 23 judges in a base. In other words, these weren't like, not talking about like 394 like hataras nedarim batei din, right? They will say these were 394 established batei din with 23 judges. So the Gemara says there are tons of judges in Yerushalayim. So why do you make it sound like there are 3, maybe 4 dayanim? To which the Gemara says, yes, you're right. Dayanan tuvahavu. We'll say first wide line. There were many dayanim. V'chi kaminon agozve gzeros kaminos. Well, it's a pretty predictable answer. So the Gemara says, of course, there were many dayanim. We're talking about, again, Abosai, like the upper echelon, right? Like the Supreme Court, right? We're talking about over here the highest level of dayanim, those who are specifically focused on these gzeros, i.e. gezelos. Incredible. Amrav Yehuda Marav, Amrav Asi, goes to gzeros Yerushalayim, how you note in schar tishim v'teisha mana mitruma salishka. So we'll say interesting halacha. The goes to gzeros, the dayanim who were focused on dealing with gezel. And again, I will say, by the way, you understand, like I said before, gezel doesn't just simply mean theft. Gezel means damages. So the dayanim who were focused on damages in Yerushalayim, they took, where did they get paid from? How you know they took tishim v'teishamana. So the salary for the Yerushalayim judiciary, for these type of dayanim, for these type of the goze gzeros, was 99 mana, and it was taken from the Trumas Halishka. Let's remember again, Trumas Halishka is the temple treasury. So they were paid from communal funds. Lo ratz mosif lahen. There was a very strange phrase. What it sounds like is, if they refused the salary, we'd add on more money. The Rebbe say, what that sounds like is, if when it came time for payday, they said, no, it's not enough for me, we'd add on more money. To which the Gemara says, what? I don't know, that doesn't exactly sound right for dayanim who are supposed to represent a certain level of piety. Ella lo sapku afa pisha lo ratsu mosifan alein. We'll say what it means is like this. This was the salary. But alocha lamaisa, if let's say again the temple administrator saw that for a particular dayan, this salary allocation was not enough, they would add on to his salary even if he didn't want it, right? The point over here was the community was taking care of its dayanim. And even though there was a basic allocation per dayan, if a particular dayan needed more, they would make sure that he had more. Incredible. I will say, get ready for this. Karna, Havashakil is, so I will say, Karna was a dayan. See, he did something interesting. Shakil istira mizakai v'istira mechayev. So I will say at the Vidan Ludina. So I'll say what he would do is when you came to Karna's Beis Din, everybody had to pay a fee. Now the way it's phrased over here is the guilty party and the innocent party would pay the fee. Now I will say bepashtos, they paid the fee up front, right? But what it means is when 2 people walk into Beis Din, pretty much, right? Even if you're not a betting man, right? What can you assume? Someone's walking in guilty, someone's walking in. We'll say, I want to point out, this is very different than, let's say, Beis Din as we have it set up today. Because Beis Din as we have it set up today is more as the concept of pshara, more the idea of trying to reach compromise, right? And ultimately, Beis Din operates really as an arbitration body. They're talking about over here, a Beis Din that would adjudicate a case. Someone's going to be guilty, someone's going to be innocent. So the point over here is when you showed up to Karna's Beis Din, there was a fee, and both parties paid the fee. To which the Gemara says, how is Karna able to take money from the litigants? Vaksiv, the pasuk says, V'shochad lo sikach, you can't take a bribe, and isn't taking money from the litigants, ultimately again a form of a bribe? To which the Gemara says, maybe I will say it's interesting, maybe it's only a bribe when you only take it from one of them. But if you take money from both parties, which is what Karna was doing, that's not a problem. To which the Gemara says, Dilma asi lisaluyedina. I'm sorry, Dilma asi latsuledina. So I'll say maybe at the end of the day, the problem only is if you're only taking it from one of the litigants. Karna keva deshachal metabayu lo asi latsuledina. But Karna, since he's taking money from both litigants, he's not going to slant judgment in favor of one. To which the Gemara says, even if Rabbi say you're taking money from both people, so there's not a concern that you're going to slant the judgment in one way. Are you allowed to take? Are you still allowed to take money? Vatanya, we learned the shochad lo sikach. Rabbi say a judge is not permitted to take a bribe. Mat hamud lomar im lamid shelo zakos esachayv v'lo chayv esazakai harik varnemar lo sata mishra. Rabbi say this is fascinating. So when the Torah says that a judge can't take a bribe, why not? If it's telling me you can't take a bribe because we're concerned that if you take money from a litigant, you're going to end up exonerating the guilty and ultimately, again, and condemning the innocent, right? If that's the concern, there's already a biblical prohibition against that. Torah already says, lo sata mishpat, do not slant justice. So therefore, again, afil lezakos esazakai, ulechayev esachayev, amra Torah shocha lo sikach. Rabbi say the pasuk of shocha lo sikach means don't even take money to judge correctly. Don't even take money to judge correctly. In other words, the idea of a judge receiving money, ultimately, again, even to judge correctly, sounds like even for both parties is problematic. To which the Gemara says, so we'll say, this is true if you're taking the money as a bribe. Karna bitoras igra havashakil. But listen to this. Karna wasn't taking it as a bribe. What was he taking it as? A wage. A wage. The Gemara says, 1 second. V'shakal b'taras igra mishari. So we'll say, ultimately, again, so is accepting money, is judge accepting money as a wage permitted? V'atana, so we learn, listen to this. Hanot el schar lodun dinav betelin. We'll say, if a judge receives a salary. Now, b'pashtus, what this means is salary from the litigants. His judgments are void. Hanimili agardina. That's true when you're getting a wage for adjudicating a case. Karna agar betela hava shakil. So we'll say this is incredible. And by the way, this is a more involved conversation. One of the conversations we'll have to come back to at some point. There's the concept, we'll say in general, of people who are involved in Melechas HaKodesh, right? People who are involved in the needs of the Jewish community. So it's always an interesting shaila with receiving a payment for that. Payment for teaching Torah, payment for learning Torah, payment for going ahead and being a judge. So we'll say there's a concept of schar batala. Schar batala means like this. If a person wouldn't be working in some role of Jewish communal service, they could be doing something else. And they could be earning a salary. So essentially, by going ahead and providing for the needs of the community, they're missing out on that earning potential. And therefore, we view their salary as kind of like a makeup for lost wages, called schar batala. So when Karna is taking money, he's not taking it as a wage. That's not his salary for being a judge. And it's certainly not a bribe. Rather, it represents what? Lost wages. Because in the moment that he's adjudicating the case, Lamaisi could be doing something else. To which the Gemara says, "Va'agar v'teila mishari." But is that mutter? Vatanya, we learned, "Mechur hadayi shenot l'schar ladun ela shedino din." It is a disgusting thing if a judge takes a salary to judge a case, but even if he did it, but if he did so, his judgments still stand. So, what's the case? Ilemar agar dina eno din. So we'll say if we're talking about somebody who's getting literally a salary for being a judge, we've already established that if you get paid a salary for being a judge, your judgments are void. Vatanya notos charladon dina betelin ela agar betela the katani mechor adanyan. Yeah, we'll say what must it represent? It must represent a judge who's getting what we call schar batala. Schar batala. If I wouldn't be a judge, I could be something else, right? And therefore I'd be getting paid for that. Now I'm doing a service to the community. I'm the judge, and therefore, again, I'm getting essentially what is effectively lost wages. But again, the Mishnah still says it's not nice. It's not appropriate. To which the Gemara says, here we go. Hani mili betela delo muchacha. So we'll say this is true when quote unquote the lost wages is not apparent. Karna betela de muchacha hava shakel davitai ba'ambira dechamra thiyav lezuze. I will say this is fascinating. Karna had a very unique skill set. What was his unique skill set? He was a wine smeller. There must be a different term for this, right? I'm going to do this in retirement, right? I'll say, right? He's a wine smeller, right? What does it mean? People would hire him. The wine merchants would hire him to sniff a barrel, and he would be able to tell how close it was to turning, right? Because this way he would tell the merchants, you got to sell this now. So I will say that's a skill set. That's a skill set. And they would pay him well for this skill set. Make us also this. So therefore I will say, and everyone knew he had this skill set. So therefore they knew that when Karna was sitting in Beis Din, he wasn't smelling wine. I will say, can you imagine poor Karna, right? He probably had cases that he's listening to. He's like, I could be smelling wine right now, right? I'm sitting with these shmendriks, right? So say so again. So because he had this profession, people understood that when he was sitting in Beis Din, he was losing out wages. So because of that, the payment he received was considered to be compensation for lost wages, and therefore was permitted. Another example of this, whenever Rav Huna, right, whenever a case would come before Rav Huna, Amar Lahu, Havali Gavra, Tidalili Becharikoi, Ve'idol Lechudina. Rav Huna would say, hire for me, right? Hire for me a guy who's going to go ahead and water my field so I could come and adjudicate this case, which is another way of saying, I'm happy to take on these responsibilities, but someone has to help me pay for my workers to be able to go ahead and do the work that I otherwise would have done. So I will say, again, this is a bit more of an involved sugya, but at least you get the idea over here, how Chazal, and this idea of a reticence, you think to yourself, like, why do Chazal begrudge the dayan from getting a salary? And the answer is they don't. Being a dayan is an incredibly difficult and important job. We're going to see the concern over here, Abosai, is money and judgment. That combination is a very scary judgment because, as we're going to get into right now, we have to be concerned for the possibility of chas v'shalom of bribery, or the appearance of bribery. And once that happens, it throws the entire legitimacy of din into question. So that's like Chazal trying to figure, we have to pay the judges, but how do you pay the judges? So again, if the judges are getting paid from the communal funds, which is the ideal, that's perfect. That's perfect. Or now we see this other model where as long as people know that the dayan could have been doing something else, and now when he sits in Beis Din, he's giving up time that he could have been earning money elsewhere, like Karna charged each of the parties. Okay, everyone knew Karna had a skill set. Rav Huna had fields that he had to work. So if that becomes clear to the litigants, and then they're charged money for the service of the Beis Din, that does not tread on any potential, shochad, a bribery issue, because everyone knows this what's called schar batala. Beautiful. We'll say some beautiful agarata. Let's say, see how much or see how dangerous bribery is. That when a person receives a bribe, how it blinds their eyes. Let's listen to this mashal. This is incredible. Adam chash be'einav. So we'll say if a person has an ailment. Now literally it's talking about an eye ailment. So what happens? No sin mamon l'rofe, safik misrape, safik eno misrape, they don't lynch. All right, so fine. So we'll say a person has an ailment. He says an eye ailment. You see for just a moment why. Person has an eye ailment. So he goes to the doctor. What does he do to the doctor? He pays the doctor. They will say, does the payment guarantee healing? No, right? So you go to the doctor, you wait for the appointment, you get the appointment, you pay good money. Maybe you'll be healed, maybe you won't be healed. Listen to this. Vehain, yet a dayan who takes a pruta, notlin shavim pruta, umesamin einehem. Yet Rabbosai, all a dayan needs to do is take one pruta, and suddenly their eyes are blinded to true judgment. Justice, I should say. Shneimar, ki hashochad ya'aver pichim. Rabbosai, what the Gemara is picking up over here is as follows. The Torah doesn't say, don't take a bribe because it may blind your ability to judge correctly. The Torah makes a definitive statement. Ki hashochad ya'aver pichim. The moment you take a bribe, you're blind. It's not a maybe. It's not a maybe. That's the distinction. I have a problem with my eyes. I go to the doctor. I pay the money. Maybe I'm healed. Maybe I'm not healed. Yeah, one pruta to a judge, by definition, I'm blinded. The entire judgment is skewed. Tan Rabbanan. Ki hashochad ya'aver einei chachamim. Kal v'chomer l'tipshim. Let's listen to this. Because ultimately, again, the shochad, the bribe, will blind the eyes of the wise, all the more so kal v'chomer to those who are foolish. The salif divrei tzadikim, and it'll pervert the words of tzadikim. Kal v'chomer l'rishayim, to which the Gemara says, "Midei tipshim rishayim b'nei dinaninu Why are you bringing up again Tipshim, foolish people, Rishayim? Are they judges? This is incredible. What it means to say? Rabbi say, what does it mean if the judge takes a bribe? Judge takes a bribe, and the bribe will blind the eyes of the wise. Afilu chacham gadol v'lokeach shochad. Rabbi say, even if a judge is exceptionally wise, but he takes a bribe, eino niftar mina olam below semios haleif. He will not leave this world without his heart being closed off. Rabbi say, the idea being, a bribe affects everyone. So Rabbi say, I just want to point out what is driving this discussion deep down. And this is really incredible to think about how easily influenced and swayed we are. It's such an incredible, incredible thing. We like to think that we have clarity of vision, and sometimes we do. But those moments of clarity could so easily be shaken by just the smallest influence here, the smallest influence there. And that's the power of bribery. See, even someone who's the greatest chacham, who has the clarity, by definition, I will say, and the Musar Haskell is, you cannot escape the impact that the influences around you have on you. We always speak about this. We like to think that I could exist in a vacuum, right? I could put myself in negative circumstances or compromised circumstances and not be impacted. I could be surrounded by people of compromised character and not be impacted. Because we like to think that we're strong enough to be able to withstand the temptations that are all around us. That is true to a degree. But even if you're able to withstand temptations, I will say, being in a negative atmosphere, being surrounded by the wrong people, it has an effect on me. Whether I act on it or not is something else, but Lamaisa, it has an impact. That's the Musar Haskell over here. You could have a dayan who's the greatest Talmid Chacham. The moment you take that pruta, the moment you take it, whether you realize you're compromised, you say, but I'm not. I stopped. You lost your clarity. You lost your. Say that it's so. I just want to point out. We're going into a new year, and so much of success in life is not about what you do, but the circumstances in which you allow yourself to be placed. So much of life is about you controlling your atmosphere. Who am I with? Where am I? What do I allow myself to be exposed to? What do I see? What do I read? All of this stuff, because all of it just has this dramatic impact. Greatest Talmid Chacham. Someone says to a pruta. People say, what can you buy with a pruta? Right? What can you possibly even do with a pruta? It doesn't matter. The moment that there's a negative influence is the moment that, by definition, at least to a certain degree, I am compromised. Incredible. People say, what does it mean again? That ultimately, again, it perverts the words, right, of the tzaddik. Afilu tzaddik gomer v'lokeach shochad. Even if a person is a tzaddik gomer, I will say not just a tzaddik, but a tzaddik gomer, and takes a bribe, he loses his clarity. Rabbi say, isn't this absolutely incredible? The power of a shochad, the power of bribery, is that you lose your clarity. You lose your clarity. Rabbi say, right? Don't. And by that, I want to point out, we bribe ourselves all the time also, right? We love to convince ourselves of certain things. So I bribe myself with this mindset, I bribe myself with that mindset. The power of bribery, even a tzaddik gomer, even if it has tir of das, the moment you take the bribe is the moment you lose your clarity. So incredible. Ki asur avdimi amar darshan nacham bar kohen, mai dichsev melech b'mishpat yamid aretz, v'ish trumos yarsenu. We'll say, what's the meaning of the pasuk? Right? Melech b'mishpat, a king who lives in judgment or justice, yamid aretz, will uphold the earth. V'ish trumos. Ish trumos, bless you, literally means a man of gifts. Yaharsena will destroy it. What does this mean? Im dome dayan lemelech she'eno tzarach leklum. If ultimately, again, if the judge is like a king, then I will say, what's unique about a king? What's unique about a king? A king needs nothing, at least material, right? So if the dayan makes himself like a king who needs nothing material, yamidaris, he'll be able to uphold the world through his judgments. Vim dome lekohen shemachsel agranas. So I will say, conversely, but if he makes himself like a kohen, the Rebbe say, being a Kohen is an incredible thing. What's the complicated part of being a Kohen? You are fundamentally dependent on others, right? Fundamentally dependent on others. You're going granary to granary to collect your truma. So that if the dayan makes himself like a Kohen who is dependent on others, yaharsena, he'll destroy the world. because since again, literally again, he lacks this independence. There's a fundamental concern regarding. I should say, there's the concern for a lack of clarity in his judgment. Also, I'll point out, by the way, this you also begin to understand why certain positions in Am Yisrael have to come with wealth. For example, the king has to be wealthy. The Kohen Gadol has to be wealthy. We learn this in Maseches Yoma. Has to be wealthy. There are certain positions, because we need these people to just be above any type of monetary sway. They have to be wealthy. And if they're not naturally wealthy, we make them wealthy. Okay. Amra Barav Shila. Hi Daina Dishal She'elta. Pasal Meidandina. This is wild. Let's say if a Dayan borrows stuff from other people, he is not fit to judge. You hear this? Right? So the Dayan, he borrows Reuven's lawnmower, right? He borrows a cup of sugar. He borrows this. If you borrow stuff from people, you're not allowed to judge. I will say again, what's the logic of it? Again, when you borrow something from someone and they lend it to you, you have a certain goodwill towards that individual. There's a concern, bless you, there's a concern that even that goodwill could compromise the authenticity of his rulings. However, I will say this is only assuming that the Dayan doesn't have stuff to lend back in return. In other words, if it's one-way borrowing, he borrows from people, but he doesn't lend out anything, that's where there's the concern that goodwill could kind of negatively impact the judgment. But if it happens to be that he has neighbors and he borrows stuff, he lends stuff, there's like a back and forth, then that's not a problem. Ini, is that so? So let's get ready for this. May debate Bar Merion, but yet Rava used to borrow stuff from the house of Bar Merion. But they never borrowed anything back from him, and he was permitted to judge. Hasam la'achshavinu deboy. Yeah, I will say there it was different. There, the fact that Rava borrowed them gave the family a certain level of chashivos. So therefore, there was like a quid pro quo, because Rava was getting the object, they were getting the chashivos. So essentially, the Gemara is saying is, as long as there's a quid pro quo, we're not worried about slanting the judgment. When it's a one-sided borrowing, that's where we're concerned about slanting the judgment. So we'll say, here we go. Amar Rava, incredible. My time in the shochda. What's the reason, ultimately, again, why accepting a bribe? Right? Ultimately, again, Rashi is my time in shochda. Lama asr litlo lizako says hazakai. So what's wrong with accepting money to do the right thing? Right? In other words, what is the problem here? To which the Gemara says, Kevan de kabale shochda mine ikravele daite legabe v'havi kaguve. Both say, the Gemara saying is like this. Imagine Reuven and Shimon walk into Beis Din, right? I'm the Dayan, and Reuven says, you know what? One of them, and Reuven says, listen, here's $1,000. I don't want you to find it in my favor. It's a shkoyach for doing the right thing in the eyes of halacha. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, right? It's fantastic. So what's wrong with that? So we know what's wrong with it, but the Gemara articulates it in such a beautiful way. Once you accept the shochad, what happens? So when Reuven gives me that money, I feel a sense of closer connection to Reuven. Reuven becomes like an extension of me. Ve'ein adam roeh chova li'atzmo. And I've also said the same way most of us don't see faults in ourselves, we also don't see faults in people who we like. Right? So I will say this is such an incredible yesod in general. So, like, number one, once again, the Gemara reinforcing how easily susceptible we are to external influences. And this is so important. Someone comes in and gives me some money, suddenly again, there's like a connection that's established. We're so susceptible to external influences. Not only that, I was saying, but lesson number two is how difficult it is for us to see our own shortcomings. How different, most of us could easily pick out the shortcomings, the difficulties, the deficiencies in another, but in ourselves, it's much more difficult. And when we like people, and I will say, number two, what often makes us like people? Number three, actually, what makes us like people? When they do stuff for us, right? When someone does something for you, and understandably so, it creates a sense of connection, and that connection sometimes makes it difficult for me to see something negative in that individual. Therefore, even to receive money to do the right thing is going to be problematic. The Gemara says, "My shochad." By the way, what is the meaning of the word shochad? And this is incredible. So we translate it as bribe. The Gemara says, etymologically, what's the meaning of the word shochad? Shehu chad. It makes the judge and the litigant into one. So incredible. Shochad. Shehu chad. Right? Makes them ultimately again into one. Incredible. So Amar Papa, lo leidun inesh dina leman dirachim lei, v'lo leman disani lei. You shouldn't be a judge. You shouldn't be a judge to someone, ultimately again, who you have compassion on, or someone ultimately again, somebody who you like, or someone who you dislike. So the Gemara says, listen to this: Derachim le lo chazi lechova, because someone who you like a lot, you're not going to find anything negative in them. Disani le lo chazi le schusa, and to someone who you dislike, you're not going to find something favorable, right? So Lamaisa, again, the Gemara just says you have to kind of go ahead and so see, anyone whom you have extreme feelings towards, either of like or dislike, do not stand in judgment of them. Incredible. Amar Abaye, Haitzara merabanan demerachmina le b'nei masa lav mishum. This is incredible. Listen to this. If a Talmid Chacham, Haitzara merabanan demerachmina le b'nei masa, if the townspeople like him a lot. So the Gemara says, "Love mishum dema'ale tfei, ella mishum de la mucha lehu b'mili dishmaya." Both say this is incredible. It's not because he's a really good guy; it's because he doesn't rebuke them, right? So both said, which is an important thing. If someone has a position of communal leadership and he's liked by everyone, chances are he's not doing his job, right? If you're liked by everyone, that means if you're not ruffling any feathers, that means you're not really doing anything. Right? So therefore, again, the Gemara says Talmid Chacham is liked by everyone, probably because he never rebukes them regarding spiritual matters. Amar Rabba will say, by the way, there's a corollary to this. The Chassam Sofer brings down, quoting this Gemara, he says, he was talking to a group of Rabbanim, he says, any Rav who is liked by everyone is not doing his job, but any Rav who is liked by no one is not a mensch. They'll say, so this interesting middle ground. Okay, first wide line, Amar Rava says as follows, Mereish Hava Amina, Hani b'nei mechuza kulu rachmali. So listen to this. Rava says in the beginning, I used to think all of the people of Mechuza liked me a lot. They liked me a lot. Kevan David Dayana, Amina minayu sanili, uminayu rachmili. Once I became a Dayan, I quickly realized some of them like me, some of them hate me. Kevan de chazoi, demand de mechayiv le'a'idna, kazachi lemachar. But then, once they began to see that I judge correctly, and even someone who's guilty today will be innocent tomorrow. In other words, that when I ruled against them, it was never anything personal. So they got to know me a little bit more. I established a judicial track record. And again, everyone began to see that what I did as a dayan. So I began to, as well said, this is incredible. I began to, Amina, imerachim kulu rachmali, imisanu kulu sanali. So we'll say, literally translated, what this means is, if some of them like me, they'll all like me. If some of them hate me, they'll all hate me. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. It's actually quite amazing. Rashi says over here, so we'll say, this is actually quite profound. Rava was saying like this, according to the Maharsha, what Rava was saying was like this. I began to realize that when people like me or dislike me, it has nothing to do with me, but it has everything to do with what's going on in their life. And as well say, what does this mean? And probably one of the most important lessons in communal leadership, which is sometimes people get angry, sometimes people get upset, sometimes people get braggis, and especially it's easy to think that as a leader that, I must have done something. Sometimes it's because a leader has done something, and sometimes it's just because people have other stuff going on in their life. And leadership often becomes a convenient lightning rod for people's disgruntledkeit, right? Whatever it is, whatever problem they're having in life, right? Whoever the person is often the soft target that they could often misdirect all of their life aggression. This is not a therapy session, I'm just saying, right? Often misdirect all of their life aggression towards. So it's pretty incredible. So Rava has like this epiphany, right? At first, everybody liked me. Yeah, you know what? Everybody liked him. You know what Rava was doing? He was a color guy. Right? He was sitting in the Beis Medrash. Everyone likes the guy in the Beis Medrash. He's fun. He's by the coffee site. He's drinking coffee. He's learning Torah. He's talking. He's this. Everybody likes him. He's fantastic. Then he became a Dayan. What happened? Suddenly, everyone hates him. Then what happened? He went ahead and he established a judicial track record. And people realized, okay, guy's just doing his job. And then I realized that more often than not, the people who don't like me, it has nothing to do with me and everything to do with them. Such an incredible Gemara, boss. Let's go weiter. Turn up on. V'shochad lo sikach. Don't take a shochad. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Eino tzarich lomar shochad mamon ela filu shochad zvar. Boss, let's at least begin. This is incredible. It goes without saying that you can't take a bribe of money. But also, we're going to see there's another form of bribery that's not money. Even words. Midlo ksiv betza lo sikach. See, I both say, if the Torah wanted to only warn me against taking monetary bribery, it could use the word betza, right? Or botza. So shocha lo sikach means even verbal bribery. So Gemara says, what's shocha dvarim? Let's listen to this. Ki hadish Shmuel hava aver b'mavra. Shmuel was once crossing a bridge. Also, Gavriyav liyadei. A man extended his hand to Shmuel to help him cross the bridge. Amar lei maya v'retech. Shmuel said, tell me, essentially, maya v'retech means, what are you doing? I will say, this is something fascinating. It's going to sound a little bit sobering, but it's important to say. Most times when people do good things, it's not altruistic. When people do good things, there's generally an angle. And there's generally a motivation. Now, that doesn't take away from the good. The good is good. But Shmuel's like, why give me your hand? Why are you helping me across the bridge? So what happens? So the Gemara says, Amrlei, Dina Islay. That's, Shmuel. Funny, I happen to be coming to your Beis Din tomorrow, right? Amrlei, Pasun L'chaladina. He says, okay, well, thank you for telling me. I have to recuse myself from it. So I'll say, we'll have to stop over here for today. I just want to point out, tomorrow's daf, even better than today, right? Incredible Gemara ahead of us. But I will say about this notion of shochad being more than just words, and to be continued. Shkoyach.